Under the pulsing neon glow of Los Angeles, where ambition burns as fiercely as the streetlights and danger lurks just beyond the next corner, a single night can change everything. Dwayne Johnson, a man known as much for his towering presence as for his genuine heart, sets out for a casual drive in his painstakingly restored Mustang, craving only a few quiet miles away from Hollywood's relentless glare. Little does he suspect that fate is about to hurl him into a collision course with a ruthless biker gang bent on leaving terror in their wake. In one electrifying moment, tranquility explodes into chaos, trust is shattered, and an unexpected alliance is born. Will loyalty, grit, and redemption be enough to triumph over the city's unforgiving underbelly? Join us in this heart-pounding ride through twists, betrayals, and high-stakes showdowns. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe to follow every pulse-racing moment of the journey. Los Angeles, a sprawling, incandescent metropolis brimming with restless ambition, has always been a magnet for wanderers, thrill-seekers, and anyone daring enough to chase a vision of something bigger. On any given afternoon, starstruck tourists line up for a glimpse of the Hollywood sign, while surfers flock to the beaches hunting the perfect wave, and motorcycle enthusiasts roar through the winding canyon roads in search of pure adrenaline. If the city had a single unifying pulse, it would surge through the rev of an engine or the promise of yet another unexpected opportunity. One late evening, Dwayne Johnson, renowned worldwide as an imposing yet profoundly kind action film star, found himself taking advantage of one of his precious nights off. No flashing cameras, no red carpets, and no memorized scripts loomed over him tonight. Instead, he found solace behind the wheel of his meticulously restored, jet black 1960s Mustang. It was a labor of love he had nurtured over countless weekends, preserving every detail as if the car were a relic of an era that he admired for its grit and authenticity. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Rachel Morgan, a longtime friend whose effervescent laughter and incisive wit had never failed to brighten his day. They had met years ago when both were fresh faces vying for roles in adrenaline-charged action flicks, forging a bond rooted as much in shared humor as in mutual respect. Over time, with Hollywood's spotlight constantly drifting elsewhere, their friendship endured, crystallizing into something stronger than the fleeting alliances so common in their industry. Whenever they could steal away from hectic filming schedules and unceasing media obligations, they did. Tonight was precisely one of those stolen moments, a chance for them to simply drive aimlessly, crank up the radio, and reminisce about the choices and missteps that had paved the winding roads of their individual careers. Their journey began along the moonlit coastline. Pale silver light caught the tips of rolling waves, while a soft ocean breeze carried the promise of cooler air, a welcome relief from the dense heat radiating off Los Angeles's labyrinth of concrete. Rachel fiddled with the radio, trying to locate a station free of static, occasionally landing on a classic rock tune that would drift in and out of clarity. Dwayne's large hands steadied the Mustang's steering wheel, occasionally tapping along with the beat. Every so often, they'd meet each other's gaze and exchange nostalgic smiles, basking in a sense of normalcy that few celebrities could genuinely savor. As the city lights receded behind them and the highway opened up, conversation flowed comfortably. They recalled those early auditions, the grueling hours, and the exhilarating rush of landing breakout roles. Their banter was interrupted only by the rhythmic hum of the Mustang's engine, acting like a steady backbeat to every memory they shared. Rachel glanced out at the dark ocean and let out a small sigh, remarking that these infrequent moments of peace were what kept her grounded in an industry that thrived on spectacle. Dwayne nodded in agreement, his gaze never leaving the moonlit road. That tranquil mood dissolved almost as soon as they veered off the freeway and pulled into a secluded, dimly lit gas station near the city's outskirts. The fluorescent tubes in the canopy overhead flickered ominously, while a buzzing neon sign sputtered against the darkness. Dwayne eased the Mustang beside a pump, stepping out to breathe in the crisp night air while he refueled. Rachel headed inside, intending to grab a couple of bottled drinks and something to snack on. It was a mundanely peaceful scene, almost dull in its simplicity, underscored by the faint chirp of crickets and the distant hum of a malfunctioning AC unit. Yet Los Angeles is a stage on which calm can transform into chaos in the blink of an eye. Dwayne was just about to return the pump nozzle to its cradle when the thunderous roar of multiple motorcycle engines shattered the quiet. Like predatory silhouettes, a pack of riders materialized, their headlights slicing through the humid night. Initially, he afforded them only a cursory glance. Groups of bikers were hardly a rarity in LA, as many roamed the streets searching for that exhilarating shot of freedom. But there was something off about this crew. Their formation was too rigid, too synchronized, and the purposeful way they surrounded the Mustang made Dwayne's instincts flare. One towering figure, helmet still on, raised an arm, signaling the others. A chill skittered down Dwayne's spine, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. Something was undeniably wrong here. A tense hush descended, slicing through the nocturnal stillness like the blade of a knife. The lead biker dismounted, pulling off his helmet to reveal a taut, angular face topped by a severe buzz cut. He fixed Dwayne with a cold, unwavering stare that suggested practiced intimidation. Behind him, a dozen more riders sat astride their rumbling machines, engines roaring in unity to form a wall of sound that bounced off the gas station's battered pavement. One biker popped down his kickstand and stalked up to the Mustang, his every step deliberate and menacing. Without preamble, the man drove a heavy boot into the side mirror, shattering it on impact. Glass shards exploded outward, scraping across the blacktop in a discordant screech. Dwayne drew a sharp breath, acknowledging the severity of the situation. He felt a potent blend of disbelief and anger coil in his chest. He wondered for a fleeting moment if they had misidentified him, or if this was some misguided attempt to provoke a fight. Before he could voice a warning, more bikers dove into the fray. A crowbar glinted under the flickering lights, and one rider swung it in a wide arc that ended on the Mustang's windshield. Cracks branched out like a spiderweb under the impact, culminating in a crescendo of shattered safety glass that clattered to the ground. Within heartbeats, it got worse. A wickedly curved knife slashed one of the Mustang's tires, releasing a hiss of air that matched the surge of outrage Dwayne felt building inside him. Another biker brandished a steel rod, slamming it into the hood with a force so punishing that metal squealed in protest. The horrifying chorus of destruction, crunching metal, popping glass, and guttural engine growls snapped Dwayne from his initial shock. Anger mingled with a fierce protective instinct. He couldn't stand by and let them pulverize the cars he'd poured so much of himself into. Clenching his jaw, he stepped closer, projecting the calm authority he'd honed over years in high-stakes movie sets and real-life confrontations alike. "Hey, back off," he commanded, voice firm but not yet raised to a roar. He knew from experience that sometimes a quiet approach could be more disarming than outright hostility. Still, these assailants seemed intoxicated by the thrill of destruction, paying no heed to anything beyond the savage joy of wrecking something beautiful. Rachel burst onto the scene moments later, the plastic bottles she had been carrying rolling away in neglected arcs as she beheld the state of the Mustang. Her eyes widened in shock, then darkened with anger. "Dwayne, what is happening?" she exclaimed, voice shaking with adrenaline. She shot him a look that was both worried and pleading. She knew he had a level-headed approach to conflict resolution, but this was spiraling out of control at breakneck speed. Dwayne forced himself to stay measured. The part of him that believed violence should be a last resort was warring with the part that recognized sometimes raw force is the only language certain people understand. Rachel, reading his expression, gently placed a hand on his arm. Her touch reminded him of the restraint he prided himself on, even as another piece of the Mustang's battered frame clattered to the ground. On the periphery, the crew of bikers continued their rampage, fueled by unstoppable momentum. Their ring tightened around the car as if orchestrated for maximum damage. Eventually, the leader, having observed enough, walked over, his face twisted into a sneer. "Something you want to say, old man?" he taunted, voice rough with derision. He stared at Dwayne like he was a trespasser on their territory, not caring that they had encroached upon his. An insult wasn't enough to set Dwayne off, but the brazen disrespect for his property, the evident joy they took in demolishing it, was a different matter. He inhaled, forcing the rage to the back of his mind. Rachel sensed his coiled tension. Their eyes met briefly, a silent conversation urging caution, but preparing for the worst. Dwayne had never been one to flaunt his celebrity. Clad in a basic leather jacket, Well-worn jeans and boots suitable for either a film set or a midnight drive, he could easily pass for just another tough-looking guy in Los Angeles. Yet circumstances were about to get stranger. Rachel, her posture shifting to one of undisguised exasperation, glared at the assembled bikers. "Are you all out of your minds?" she snapped, her tone slicing through the uproar. "Any idea who this man is? What he could do if he really wanted to?" She jabbed a finger in Dwayne's direction, frustration radiating off her in waves. The gang's leader unleashed a short, cutting laugh. His eyes flickered with the cruelty of someone accustomed to exerting power through intimidation. "Yeah, sure, lady," he drawled. "He's got money, maybe even some fancy connections. But that doesn't mean a damn thing to us." He cast a dismissive glance over Dwayne's imposing frame, seemingly unimpressed. Around him, some of his crew looked less certain, shifting from foot to foot as their bravado warred with an unspoken sense of caution. But everything changed when Rachel raised her voice again, targeting a younger biker whose hesitant posture and darting gaze suggested he wasn't fully on board with the carnage. "Hey, you," she said, pointing at the vest that displayed the name Seth. "You watch action movies, don't you?" Seth paused, lips parting in visible confusion. Yeah," he mumbled, sounding more like an anxious teenager than a hardened outlaw. Rachel planted her hands on her hips. "Then you know exactly who Dwayne Johnson is," she said flatly, a note of exasperation creeping in. The moment his name dropped, she could almost feel the atmosphere tilt. Seth fished out his phone, flipping through photos as if needing confirmation. The leader snapped at him, demanding to know what he was doing, but Seth ignored the scolding, his face paling with growing recognition. "Oh my God," Seth muttered under his breath, glancing between his phone and the formidable man before him. It's really him." He looked like he'd seen a mythic hero materialize before his eyes. The leader, noticing this drastic shift, scowled deeper. Still, the damage was done. Realization spread like a ripple among several other bikers, eyes widening in disbelief. Dwayne, for his part, didn't flinch. Fame had never been his focal point, but it often came in handy in peculiar ways. Sometimes it opened doors. Sometimes it provoked envy. But here it might very well halt a situation from spiraling into further violence. Yet the group's leader, determined not to lose face, spat out Dwayne's name as though it were a curse. "Never cared for Hollywood hotshots," he sneered. "Couldn't care less if he's the biggest star on the planet." Rachel leveled an even stare at him, unimpressed. "You'll care when you figure out you've destroyed something precious to a man who doesn't take kindly to bullies," she said firmly. She could see a flicker of uncertainty behind the leader's eyes, although he tried to mask it with scorn. Finally breaking his silence, Dwayne cleared his throat. "All right, enough," he said, voice measured but tinged with tension. "You've made your point, whatever it was. Now the real issue is how you're going to fix this, or if you plan to make an even bigger mess out of your night." Though he spoke calmly, there was no mistaking the weight behind his words. Several bikers visibly tensed, likely recalling rumors of the star's philanthropic work and reputed physical prowess. For an interminable second, no one spoke. Then with grudging defiance, the leader, whose vest bore the name Blade, lifted his chin. "And if we don't?" he challenged. Rachel sensed the subtle shift in Dwayne's posture. There was a fine line between negotiation and confrontation, and they were teetering on its edge. "Then you'll live with the consequences," Dwayne replied, voice still low but carrying an undertone that left no room for misinterpretation. Silence flooded the gas station, as ominous as a heavy storm cloud about to unleash. Blade and Dwayne locked gazes, each assessing the other in a taut standoff. The bikers circled around them like wolves, unsure whether to protect their alpha or scatter. Dwayne mentally weighed his options. He could call law enforcement, but that might ignite a dangerous chase or escalate tensions in ways he couldn't control. On the other hand, the Mustang was in tatters, and words alone wouldn't magically restore it. Rachel broke the momentary deadlock by letting out a half laugh, derisive but tinged with disbelief. "What's really baffling is that you guys trashed the wrong car, belonging to the wrong person, And you're still acting tough, she said, shaking her head. Blade shot her a venomous look, but she stared him down, refusing to be cowed by his hostility. Dwayne exhaled slowly, then refocused on Blade. You're the one calling the shots here, I take it? All right, let's handle this in a way that doesn't end with a bunch of broken bones or jail time. He slid his gaze over to the line of motorcycles, their gleaming metal reflecting the harsh overhead lights. After a pause, he added, I propose a race. You and me, one-on-one. Murmurs rippled through the bikers. Even Rachel raised an eyebrow, caution embedded in her voice. Dwayne, are you sure about this? She asked in a subdued tone, stepping closer. She had seen him handle intense action scenes, but those were choreographed with stunt coordinators, safety harnesses, and a medical crew on standby. It's their turf, Dwayne said quietly, not taking his eyes off Blade. But it might be the only way to avoid a brawl that leaves people hurt. Raising his voice again, he addressed Blade. If I win, you and your crew pay for every cent it takes to restore my Mustang, and you agree never to pull this kind of stunt again. Blade arched an eyebrow, letting out a snide laugh. You think you'll win on that four-wheeled wreck? It can't even roll off the lot now. He tilted his head, indicating the torn-up state of the Mustang. A faint smile tugged at Dwayne's lips. Not that car, he explained, nodding toward the row of sleek motorcycles. One of yours. Let me borrow it. Unless you're worried, I'll beat you at your own game. A surge of apprehension coursed through the bikers. A few exchanged nervous glances, recalling rumors of Dwayne's physical prowess and willingness to do his own stunts. Blade's pride, however, was at stake, and there was no way he'd publicly back down. You're on, he shot back, summoning one of his men to roll forward a black and chrome beast of a bike. We ride from here to that old diner a couple miles down the road, then back. Winner takes all. Rachel pressed her lips together, her heart pounding. She could almost envision the headlines if anything went wrong, but she also recognized that once Dwayne got that particular glint in his eye, he wouldn't be easily dissuaded. The tension was so thick you could slice it with a blade. No pun intended. Stepping up to the machine, Dwayne took a moment to inspect it, running his hand over the handlebars as if calibrating himself to its energy. Blade, already straddling his own bike, revved the throttle in an intimidating roar. Rachel's instincts screamed that this was a bad idea, yet she also understood that in this moment, reason alone wouldn't prevail. It was time for a showdown, on asphalt, at high velocity, where bravado or skill would claim victory. Time seemed to distort in the minutes leading up to the race. Blade revved his engine again, the guttural roar of the bike echoing across the deserted road. Meanwhile, Seth and several other bikers fanned out, repositioning their own motorcycles to serve as makeshift barriers against any unsuspecting drivers who might wander into this ad hoc speedway. Rachel stood off to the side, arms folded tightly against her chest. She was used to tension on movie sets, but the sense of real danger now gnawed at her nerves. There were no retakes if someone crashed here. Dwayne walked up to the black and chrome bike that had been grudgingly offered. Before swinging a leg over, he tugged on a spare helmet provided by Grady, a burly older biker whose face bore a mixture of skepticism and grudging respect. Dwayne spent a few extra seconds gripping the throttle, testing the brakes, and feeling the weight of the machine beneath him. It hummed with raw power, and he focused on synchronizing his breaths with its steady vibration. Across the makeshift starting line, Blade eyed him with an air of smug confidence. He had the advantage of familiarity. He knew his own ride inside and out. Yet Dwayne, calm and methodical, possessed the advantage of adaptability and a background peppered with high-octane experiences. While the rest of the bikers formed a loose semicircle, Jade, a dark-haired woman and Blade's second-in-command, stepped into the center of the road. In her raised hand, she clutched a frayed red bandana, ready to drop it as the official signal. Rachel approached Dwayne one last time, placing a trembling hand on his shoulder. "Please, be careful," she whispered, the glow of the streetlights revealing the worry etched into her features. Dwayne nodded, the corners of his mouth tightening into a reassuring smile. He didn't have to say anything. The resolve in his eyes spoke volumes. Jade's voice rang out, thin but clear in the still night. "All right, you both know the rules. From here, down to the diner and back. First one here again is the winner. No shortcuts, no foul play. She paused, letting her gaze roam over both men. Let's do this clean. A tense hush fell as Jade raised the bandana overhead, every pair of eyes riveted to that small scrap of fabric. The roar of the engines intensified, punctuating each nerve-wracking second. Rachel thought she heard her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. Then, with a swift downward slash of Jade's arm, the bandana fluttered away, and both bikes lunged forward like caged predators set loose. Their headlights cut arcs through the darkness as they surged down the narrow road, leaving behind a haze of dust and the echo of screeching tires. Blade shot ahead first, taking advantage of that crucial initial burst. Dwayne, however, didn't rush. His approach was calculated, allowing him to observe the subtle shifts of Blade's posture, the line he took through each turn. The world blurred at the edges. Lights from distant intersections flickered like beacons in a void, overshadowed by the sheer focus needed to navigate the machine. The pavement blurred under the high beams as they thundered past shuttered businesses and empty lots. Adrenaline pulsed through Dwayne's veins, heightening every sense. The hum of the engine under him became a hypnotic rhythm, a companion in this test of nerve and skill. An old diner's neon sign glowed feebly up ahead, a beacon marking the halfway point. Blade angled his bike aggressively, trying to maintain the lead, but he misjudged the arc of his turn. Sparks skittered off the asphalt as his footrest grazed the ground. Dwayne seized the moment, leaning into his own turn with precision, hugging the inside curve and smoothly overtaking Blade. The neon sign reflected off Dwayne's helmet as he blew past the midpoint, Blade now behind him, but not out of the race by any means. The return leg tested not just raw speed, but also nerve and control under pressure. Dwayne whipped around the far side of the diner's lot, feeling a jolt of triumph as he caught a glimpse of Blade in his mirrors. Yet the gap was anything but secure. Blade accelerated fiercely, cutting corners with a recklessness that suggested he was prepared to risk everything for victory. The shriek of metal and rubber echoed around them, a wild symphony of velocity tearing through the hush of the sleeping city outskirts. Back at the makeshift starting line, Rachel and the rest of the bikers stood in a tense cluster. Their faces reflected a spectrum of emotions: anticipation, concern, awe. Seth bounced anxiously on the balls of his feet, his eyes darting down the road as though he could will Dwayne to reappear. Jade alternated between pacing and biting her lip, arms folded as if attempting to contain her own adrenaline. Grady stared into the distance, his expression unreadable under the flickering light. Suddenly, the low growl of an engine began to swell, each second intensifying the collective pulse of the onlookers. Two headlights emerged from the darkness, but it quickly became evident there was a bike in the lead and one lagging slightly behind. Rachel braced herself. Her heart pounded so fiercely she wondered if everyone else could hear it. In a screech of tires and a cloud of dust, Dwayne's borrowed motorcycle barreled into the gas station lot. He came to a calculated stop, engine still snarling, and planted a boot onto the asphalt. Blade followed close behind, arriving in a less controlled flourish. When the dust settled, a stunned hush replaced the roar of engines. No one moved for a moment. Then relief rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Rachel rushed forward, relief overriding her composure. Dwayne swung a leg off the bike and pried off his helmet, beads of sweat lining his forehead. Their eyes met, and the tension dissolved into a shared breath. Meanwhile, Blade yanked off his own helmet and hurled it to the ground, frustration twisting his features. Disbelief flickered there, too. He'd lost in a test of skill he thought he'd dominate. A moment later, scattered applause broke the silence, led by Grady's slow, deliberate clapping. Seth whooped, apparently too stunned to do anything else, and Jade exhaled in a resigned sigh that indicated a reluctant admiration. One after another, the bikers acknowledged that Dwayne had won, fair and square. Blade glared at Dwayne, chest heaving from the intensity of the race. He looked like he might snap, but after a lingering moment, he extended a grudging nod. "All right, you won," he bit out, the words scraping against his pride. "We'll fix your damn car, and we won't pull this kind of crap again." Rachel gazed at him with something approaching pity. You did the damage. Now it's time to do what's right, she said, her voice steady but not unkind. A ripple of relief spread through the crowd. The potential for a full-scale brawl had hovered like a storm cloud, but now it dissipated under the weight of a sealed agreement. Dwayne, feeling the night's intensity drain from his limbs, extended his hand to Blade. After a fleeting hesitation, Blade accepted it in a firm, if reluctant, handshake. Seth was the first to break the renewed silence, an almost giddy note in his voice. Did you guys see how he took that last turn? He gushed, looking at Jade and Grady for confirmation. Like, I swear, I've never seen anything like that outside of a stunt show. Jade shrugged, but the corners of her mouth curved upward. Even Blade couldn't entirely conceal a flicker of respect. Despite the tension still lingering in the air, it was clear a line had been crossed, one that left them all changed in some small way. With the race concluded and tempers momentarily cooled, everyone turned their attention to the battered Mustang. At dawn, they hauled the ruined vehicle to a decrepit warehouse on the fringes of the city, a place the biker crew had claimed as their unofficial base. The building's corrugated metal walls bore scrawled graffiti, and the ground was littered with oil stains from countless mechanical experiments. Yet within this tough exterior lay a trove of tools, spare parts, and mechanical know-how that could potentially resurrect the Mustang from its devastating state. Rachel and Dwayne arrived just as an old forklift carefully placed the Mustang on a patch of cleared concrete near the entrance. Sunlight filtered through broken skylights, illuminating the cracked windshield, mangled hood, and sagging bumper. Seeing the car's disfigurement up close made Dwayne's heart twinge. He recalled the countless hours he'd spent lovingly tuning that engine, polishing every inch of its body, treating the Mustang like a cherished family heirloom. Now it resembled a beaten shell of its former glory. But the bikers, having sworn to fix what they had broken, got to work immediately. Blade hunkered down by a cluttered workbench, flipping through parts catalogs. Nearby, Seth rummaged for wrenches and drills, while Grady fired up a welding torch near the hood. Jade organized the day's tasks, her natural leadership emerging in calm directives. Each person had a role, their collective effort propelled by a complex mix of obligation, curiosity, and a reluctant respect for the man whose property they'd destroyed. Dwayne shrugged off his jacket, mindful of the acrid smell of heated metal and motor oil. Catching Blade's eye, he asked, "Need an extra set of hands?" Blade hesitated but eventually nodded. A subtle tension remained. Dwayne sensed that Blade didn't love the idea of working alongside him, yet pride and duty compelled him to accept help. Without another word, Dwayne pulled up a stool near the open hood. He scanned the engine with a practiced eye. "We'll need to straighten the frame before we do anything else," he commented, nodding at the twisted metal. "Spark plugs are shot, and the radiator looks like it's been on the losing end of a demolition derby." Rachel, meanwhile, had her phone out, capturing short videos. She sent a quick clip to a friend in the film industry, adding a dry caption, "Dwayne Johnson salvaging his own Mustang with ex-outlaw bikers in LA. Because life in this city is never dull." Moments later, her phone chimed with a barrage of stunned replies. She smirked, turning to see Jade glancing over with mild curiosity. "Movie folk?" Jade asked. "Something like that," Rachel replied with a grin. As the day wore on, any illusions of quick fixes dissolved. Shattered glass littered the interior, the upholstery was torn, and the axle alignment was completely off. Yet a strange camaraderie began to coalesce. Dwayne offered to lug heavy parts from corner to corner. Jade cross-referenced potential replacements from online catalogs, and Seth meticulously removed jagged metal pieces. Even Blade, though still visibly conflicted, consulted with Dwayne on structural integrity. Rachel found herself assisting wherever she could, from running for coffee to labeling boxes of bolts and screws. At one point, she even coaxed Grady, initially aloof and intimidating, into sharing stories about his younger days, back when he'd been a skillful mechanic at a legitimate shop. The conversation underscored a common thread. People aren't always what they seem, and second chances can emerge in the unlikeliest of places. By sundown, progress was tangible, if modest. The hood had been detached for further work, the windshield frame partially cleared of shattered glass, and some internal damages identified. The air felt thick with exhaustion and the lingering smell of welding sparks. Yet amid it all, a feeling of unexpected unity began to take root. Watching Blade scrutinize engine parts beside Dwayne without overt hostility, Rachel could almost believe this precarious truce had potential to hold. Even as a fragile sense of collaboration took shape, fate had other plans. On the second evening of repairs, the warehouse had settled into a productive rhythm, a cacophony of clanking metal, murmured instructions, and the occasional sizzle of a welding torch. They had fitted a temporary windshield, hammered out dents in the chassis, and begun ordering crucial replacement parts. Everyone was so immersed in the task at hand that they almost missed the approach of a sleek, black luxury sedan rolling up to the building with an air of practiced stealth. The vehicle's engine idled, purring low like a stalking predator. Blinking headlights pierced the dimly lit interior of the warehouse through the open bay door, halting all work. Blade stiffened visibly, setting aside the wrench he'd been using. Jade's gaze snapped toward the intruder, a flicker of worry crossing her usually composed face. Even Grady muttered under his breath, something that sounded suspiciously like a curse. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped a tall, lean man wearing a dark, impeccably tailored suit. The crisp cut of the fabric contrasted with the grimy surroundings, and a faint smirk curled his lips. He surveyed the battered Mustang and the makeshift assembly of bikers and outsiders. Rachel felt her pulse kick up, aware that this visitor exuded the same menacing aura as a coiled viper. Blade was the first to speak, tone laced with undisguised hostility. "Marcus," he growled, taking a small step forward. "What do you want?" In those few words, the entire warehouse grasped that the man's presence signaled trouble, serious trouble. Marcus briefly let his gaze wander from Blade to Dwayne, pausing when he recognized the actor's imposing physique. For a moment, it looked like he might say something. Instead, he turned back to Blade. "I see you're keeping busy, fixing up some Hollywood star's wreck," he remarked, hands sliding into his suit pockets. "Can't say I'm surprised you found another project, Blade. You always did like to tinker." Blade's jaw clenched. "We're out, Marcus," he said flatly, ignoring the slight jab. "We told you that. We don't owe you anything anymore." Those words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus took a slow step forward, causing a ripple of tension among the bikers. "Funny how that works," he said, feigning a pensive tone. "Debts don't just vanish because you declare them null. And last I checked, you owed me quite a bit." He made a show of examining the warehouse's interior. Scattered tools, half-repaired engines, grease-stained floors, and curled his lip in mild disdain. "But I suppose you and your crew don't see it that way." Dwayne, who had been observing from a few steps behind Rachel, spoke up, voice measured but unyielding. "He said they're done, so you'll have to take that as a fact." He stepped forward, positioning himself in Marcus's line of vision. Marcus studied Dwayne with an arched eyebrow. "I know who you are," he said at last, though he didn't sound particularly impressed. "Dwayne Johnson. Word is you're a big-shot actor, does your own stunts, thinks he's unstoppable." He gave a dismissive wave. "But fame and muscle won't stop me from collecting what's owed." Rachel's hand reflexively tightened around her phone, remembering how quickly violence had escalated before. If Marcus was half as dangerous as he seemed, a confrontation could spin out of control with frightening speed. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Blade looked ready to pounce, while Jade and Grady shifted subtly, forming a protective semicircle. Marcus let his eyes wander over the group, like a serpent sizing up each possible meal. "Look at this," he said softly, gesturing at the half-repaired Mustang. "You've got an entire crew working on some vanity project, as if you all suddenly grew a conscience. But let me remind you, once you're in my debt, you don't walk away without settling up." His gaze flicked back to Blade, whose fists were clenched tight enough to whiten his knuckles. Dwayne stepped fully between Blade and Marcus. "From what I've heard," he said, his calm voice carrying an undercurrent of challenge, "your methods include blackmail, intimidation, and exploitation. Maybe Blade and his crew used to be part of that world, but they've decided to make a change. You don't own them anymore." Marcus stared back with cool amusement. "Listen to you, all righteous. This isn't one of your Hollywood scripts, he said, lips curling into a sneer. There's no guarantee of a happy ending if you meddle in my affairs. If you value your safety, you'll step aside. Before Dwayne could respond, Blade, teetering on the edge of restraint, exploded with frustration. You made us run jobs we never wanted, ferry stolen parts, threatened people who were innocent. We tried to break free, and you sent your goons after us. We're done, Marcus. Done with your dirty money and your threats. Marcus's eyes gleamed with a predatory glint. Such brave talk, he mused, stepping forward so that he was almost nose to nose with Blade. Abruptly, he grabbed Blade by the collar of his vest. A gasp rose in the warehouse, and for a split second, it seemed certain violence would erupt. But Dwayne lunged in an almost fluid motion, seizing Marcus's arm and forcing him to let go. They stood locked in a silent test of will, the tension in their muscles radiating outward like a coiled spring. The bikers, momentarily paralyzed, braced themselves for the slightest signal that might spark a full-scale altercation. Rachel, phone in hand, hesitated. Calling the police might incite more chaos, but letting this escalate further could be disastrous. Marcus jerked free, scowling at Dwayne. This isn't over, he hissed, stepping backward with palpable fury. One call from me in this pathetic warehouse and everyone in it goes up in flames. He let the threat linger, then turned on his heel and strode back to his car, sliding into the driver's seat. The engine roared, tires squealing as he sped off into the night. A heavy silence enveloped the warehouse in his wake, leaving the group to grapple with what had just transpired. Blade exhaled slowly, as if a band around his chest had been loosened. Jade folded her arms, tension etched into every line of her body, while Seth hovered near the Mustang, eyes wide. Dwayne's adrenaline still coursed through his veins, but he made an effort to speak calmly. He'll be back, he said quietly. People like that don't walk away empty-handed. Blade pressed his lips together, nodding. We know, he replied. Marcus doesn't bluff. We'll need a plan if we want to stand a chance, because if we do nothing, he'll hunt us down. Rachel, voice unsteady, asked, Is there any way we can collect evidence on him? Some way to keep him off your backs? She glanced around, noting the shared looks of uncertainty. Scrubbing a hand over his face, Blade admitted, We never kept records. Paper trails are a liability in our old line of work. A weary pause followed. But maybe we can start piecing things together. Shine some light where Marcus prefers the dark. In the uneasy hours and days that followed Marcus's ominous visit, an oppressive tension weighed on the warehouse like a perpetual storm front. The bikers, once a ragtag collection of thrill chasers, found themselves on unfamiliar ground. They were still repairing the Mustang, but now it wasn't just about atoning for property damage. It was about forging a path out from under the looming specter of Marcus's wrath. Every clang of metal, every spark of a welding torch, carried an undercurrent of anxious urgency. Dwayne took on more tasks each day, shouldering responsibilities that ranged from helping Grady realign the chassis to brainstorming strategy with Blade. Rachel, on the other hand, took on a different role. Recognizing the unique threat Marcus posed, she huddled with the crew and convinced them to compile every scrap of information they had on his criminal empire. Phone numbers, addresses of shady chop shops, dates of suspicious shipments, even recollections of coded conversations. Although most of the gang had avoided paper trails, some had hazy recollections they were willing to piece together. Seth recalled a few license plates from cars he'd been told to relocate. Jade remembered specific meeting times scrawled on bar napkins. Blade could recite from memory the layout of an illegal street racing circuit that served as a lucrative front for Marcus's money laundering. The more they compiled, the more the scope of Marcus's influence became alarmingly clear. He had webbed his fingers into multiple illegal markets, stolen car parts, gambling rings, and high-stakes underground races where fortunes could pivot on a single race. He thrives on secrecy, Rachel pointed out, scrolling through a spreadsheet she'd created on her laptop. If we can shed enough light on his operations, we can put him in a corner. Dwayne nodded, arms folded across his broad chest. But we need help, someone who can push this into official channels and guarantee that once Marcus is cornered, he can't slither free. A solution arose in the form of an old contact of Rachel's, Dana Ward, a local investigative reporter known for tenacity and unwavering integrity. Rachel reached out cautiously, explaining she had a story that could break wide open, provided Dana was prepared to deal with dangerous repercussions. Dana, always on the hunt for injustice to expose, practically salivated at the prospect of unveiling a major criminal network. A secret meeting was arranged in a nondescript cafe 2 blocks from the warehouse just after dusk. Rachel, Dwayne, and Blade arrived in an unmarked SUV borrowed from one of the bikers. They kept a low profile, scanning the street for any sign of Marcus's watchers. The cafe itself was nearly empty, giving them enough seclusion to lay out their findings. Dana listened intently, occasionally lifting a small recorder to capture an exact phrase or detail. Her sharp brown eyes glittered with professional excitement. "This is massive," Dana breathed after an hour of reviewing evidence. "With the right corroboration, maybe even a sting operation, law enforcement would have no choice but to clamp down on Marcus. We just have to ensure he doesn't have time to bury everything." Dwayne glanced at Blade, whose features had settled into a grim resolve. "That's where we come in. We're all in this together, or we'll never be free of him." In the days that followed, a carefully orchestrated plan kicked into motion. Dana leaked certain details to trusted sources in local law enforcement. Responding to the tip of a prominent reporter, investigators discreetly confirmed stolen vehicles, unregistered weapons, and layers of gambling operations. Word reached Marcus's underlings, who scrambled to cover tracks and relocate assets. But the walls were closing in. Meanwhile, the Mustang's restoration reached a fever pitch. If the crew needed a symbolic victory, finishing the car was it. Busted fenders were replaced, spark plugs swapped, bent frames hammered back into place. Layer by layer, the once ruined vehicle emerged reborn. Through it all, a sense of unity took shape among the bikers, Rachel and Dwayne, an unlikely alliance forged by necessity, but strengthened by a genuine mutual respect. Finally, the storm broke. Marcus stormed into the warehouse one last time, flanked by only a couple of shaken henchmen. "Which one of you ratted me out?" he roared, eyes blazing. But his reign of terror had reached its final act. Outside, sirens wailed, growing louder by the second. Within minutes, law enforcement converged, cornering Marcus and confiscating what incriminating evidence they hadn't already gathered. After a tense standoff, Marcus found himself outmaneuvered on every front. The empire he had built through fear and coercion collapsed in a matter of hours. Blade and the others watched from the sideline, subdued but relieved. The sky began to lighten, dawn's first rays revealing a cluster of police vehicles and subdued faces. For a moment, nobody spoke, as if each was absorbing the reality that the shadow looming over their lives had finally lifted. Rachel held her phone by her side, her gaze on Dwayne. He, too, exhaled a deep breath. "It's done," he murmured, relief and fatigue mingling in his voice. A few days later, the warehouse echoed with more celebratory sounds. The Mustang, gleaming in a fresh coat of paint, now boasted new tires, a perfectly aligned chassis, and a throaty engine that purred like a content predator. Rachel captured every angle with her phone, determined to document this transformation for posterity. Blade, Jade, Seth, and Grady stood around in a semicircle, each quietly proud of the work they had accomplished, grateful for a new beginning that no longer involved running from the ghosts of their past. That night, Dwayne fired up the Mustang for its maiden voyage post-repair, and the bikers accompanied him on their motorcycles. As they glided through the neon-lit streets of Los Angeles, once dangerous territory, now a shimmering backdrop to their unlikely bond, laughter and engine roars replaced the tension that had once hung in the air. The city, as ever, remained a place where dreams and nightmares were separated by the slimmest of margins. But for this group, a new chapter was dawning. They had chosen camaraderie over fear, integrity over intimidation. And for Dwayne Johnson, at the wheel of the car he had painstakingly restored, Louisiana, shone with a renewed kind of magic, one forged not by Hollywood illusions, but by real courage and the promise of redemption.